but it's not how you build a community. So we need more of that.
Positive
Yeah.
vibes only. Positive vibes only. Maybe we should change that. Change my talk to that. That's it.
And we are live. Welcome to MageTalk Season 3, and you can consider this the reboot. I was lucky enough to inherit MageTalk from our founding fathers, Philip and Kalen. Yeah, from the capacity of Hiva teams, I'm very eager to talk about what's going on in the Magento community and connect with people in the community and just talk about what's going on right now and how we envision the future of Magento. Today, I'm talking with Eric Irway, and it's an honor to me. It's someone I think that has had a major impact on the Magento community. He more or less took over from Ben Marks, who used to be community evangelist, and in a bit of the same capacity, Eric represented Adobe. Both words represented Magento to Adobe and represented Adobe towards the community. You were our bridge, and I had the pleasure of working with you in the Magento Association while we were both board members until you left Adobe, I think 2 years ago. Yeah, I'm just really stoked to talk to you and just chat about how life is and what you're up and about right now. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for having me. It's if I could say one thing, it's good to be back. Honestly, it's good to see you. I'm so happy being part of the community again, and I've had so many opportunities, even in the past couple months, with my new role at ShipperHQ, to really reconnect with the community. Starting off with Meet Magento Florida, which seems like a while ago, but it was just a couple months ago, and really reconnecting with those at Summit and Shop Talk, and we've got a big event coming up here at Meet Magento UK, but it's more than just the events. It's really getting back to the part that really got me going every single morning. And yeah, I couldn't be happier to be back in the community. Happier to be back here in MageTalk. And so I appreciate you having me.
Well, thank you for pushing me, because we said we would record an episode, and many months went by, and now we just decided in the middle of the day, let's just do it now, because there will be an excuse always not to be able to record. Of course, the time difference is a bit of a challenge, but yeah, I'm thankful that we're doing this now. You just said you're now working for ShipperHQ, which of course has really strong ties to the Magento community. Joe Baker has always been a really strong voice in the community and really empowered the community and fought a lot for the rights of the community. So we're really grateful to her for being that voice. And I was really stoked to see you joining them after your trip outside of the Magento community at card.com. What was it like for you to step outside of the Magento bubble for 2 years, maybe?
Yeah.
And then come back into the community. How were things left? How did you experience coming back into the community? What's changed?
Gosh, so much has changed and so much has not, and I say that in a good way. I think taking a perspective, and you can say this about almost anything in life, when you kind of zoom out and take, kind of look at things, you realize the most important parts. And, I had a really, really positive experience at cart.com. I learned a lot, worked with a lot of smart people, moved fast and got deeper into areas that I wasn't as involved in around fulfillment and logistics and getting back into the throes of the startup. So it reminded me a lot of what I really enjoyed back in my earliest days of Magento, at this point, seemingly like almost 10 years ago. And so I liked a lot about that, but I think, one of the things I realized is I really missed the Magento community, like the proper Magento community. I really enjoyed working in commerce. I know things have changed. I know people who've moved on and things of that, but the community is the product, right? And I keep saying that, and I always, when you talk about like product management and all, yes, there's the physical product, but there's the people around it. You and I have known each other for years in different contexts. We've known people who are doing some really interesting and different things, and that's great as well. And I think what I realized is, sometimes there's such an obsession around the platform, the technology. While that's incredibly important, I think that unifies people. I think the reality is it's the people around it. It's around innovation. It's around delivering to customers. It's around, like, quite honestly, making, what makes you happy, right? Both collectively and those around you. And so I couldn't be happier, and I couldn't be more thankful about the opportunity. It really has worked out, and we're doing some really amazing things over at ShipperHQ. And I'm really thankful for Joe and others who've been those advocates, and it really were some of the draws I had about coming back into it. So yeah, super happy. Yeah.
Your official capacity is product or experience designer, can I say? You started out as a UX designer, I think. Yep. And that's also what your initial role at Magento was, pre-Adobe acquisition. How did that role evolve? Like, how did you come into Magento initially? What did you work on, and how did you grow into becoming the driving factor behind PWA Studio, which I'm sure we have some things to talk about.
What's that? Tell me more about this. It's a great question. I've in many ways it's complicated when you see my background. I tend to solve a lot of the same type of problems under different contexts. My background actually goes way back in computer science. My first couple of years were really around development around platforms that don't even exist. But I found myself at the front end time and time again. At the time, the disciplines of user experience, aside from maybe the research, were pretty nascent. And so I'd always find myself wanting to solve for some of those problems, appreciating the back end, appreciating everything that's behind all of that. But I kept wanting to solve those problems. So every situation I was in, whether it's a small company, actually, spent some time in, working on, in the government as an intern and things like that. You want to, like, regardless of title or function, like, I'm always finding myself there. And so every company tends to have these different. One of the biggest ironies around product management is the profession itself is not as defined as it could and should be. Some product managers do their own designs. Some of them don't. Some designers get a little bit more into product and do their own research. And so it's been a really wild ride all the way from kind of my academics and even before that into some of my earliest work and getting into Magento, where the problem to solve for when I came in was right at the beginnings of I would say right about when Magento 2 was going to be released. And so we were in the throes. Having worked with and working with the teams that were doing the designs, the product team was just forming, and we're starting to really rev out the last aspects of the experience, like the storefront, like Luma. Fun side note on Luma. I don't know if people know, the photography for Luma was done by some of the folks within the innovations group on the coast of the Jersey Shore. And so, like, the team actually did a lot of, I remember a lot of the makings of that all coming together. We had a content writer who did all the sample data, and all of those things were happening right when I got there. And so the problem was really around the experience design, shoring that up. And then at the time we brought on some advanced prototypers to help us kind of rough out, like, what is the next thing. And so at that point I started looking at some of our next products, like order management, with some of the teams in Barcelona, and then came back into the core product itself and really refocused. And this goes into kind of the throes of COVID, like leading the 2.4 release and working with the various teams that kind of were in support of that. And the thread through all of that was the community, where there's the community on the inside of Magento proper, then into Adobe. But then what really got me excited, and this kind of comes back to happiness, was co-developing, co-designing, all of that with the community for that. And so some of my best moments professionally, but certainly with Magento and Adobe, or around PWA Studio, but not limited to that. I would love sitting in hackathons, talking with people. As a designer is a great way to get feedback. As someone who used to be a developer, it was interesting to appreciate what was going on there. And as someone who in product, like we thrive on shipping things, right? And so you would see, small pieces towards the whole in doing so. And some of that even went into some new and interesting areas with Google. Like we did, and I think you're there. We had a couple of these contribution days where we contributed.
Yeah,
some
well,
of the
we met the first time.
Magento rules. We did at that
Magento
table at the
Live,
end, right? So yeah,
Magento Live EU in Amsterdam.
Yep.
2018, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did the rules for Lighthouse. I don't think people knew that. So we fed those into that team at the time, and so we've been fortunate to work on some really interesting work. But to your question, it really is kind of my role and my background is always kind of flexed where that's needed, and inherently there's some crossover.
So I should think about writing out customer journeys, really leading the UX UI team, design team, just thinking of what those user interactions should look like. And you did that both partly for Luma and then eventually, what did it look like when PWA Studio was first discussed internally? What did that moment in time look like when the decision was made not to continue investment in Luma, if I may say that, and go to, I've heard the stories, not extensive, but apparently there was a group of people that marched to Mordor. No, they went to the Google head office, and you talked about this new thing that Google was working out, which was PWA technology. How did that process go?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I came in probably a month or two after a lot of that had been kind of set in motion. So I joined shortly after James Etlin and others really started to get involved. And the origin of the project was really to solve, and I think it's a unique problem to solve because I see a lot of the goodness happening with Whova. It started with the developer experience, actually, and a developer experience and the acknowledgement of a front end that wasn't, that was starting to kind of reach its limits in terms of what it could and should do. But James is always a very big advocate of the developer experience. We actually spent quite a bit of time, even at the API level, with Saumya and others who would just we would understand usability at the API level, things that you don't really typically do. What does it mean to be friendly, and what does it mean to be user friendly? As we started to build out the GraphQL endpoints in parallel, but it started off as that from that thrust in parallel to our relationship that was building with Google, who was a big advocate for the open web and a big advocate for some of the newer technologies around the service worker and some of the libraries that supported that. And so it was a unique match that helped us achieve what we were trying to do, get the support and I would say some of the guidance. It was very much just a light collaboration, really not beyond that. And then that would then get into aspects like Lighthouse and others where Magento as a whole kind of rose up because we were able to include recommendations on how to make that better as we were kind of developing the next. But it started off with developer experience, and when I came in, I was like, this is great, but we've got to make sure we're continuing to extend this into the other personas who are part of this journey. Obviously, the shopper experience, but also the merchant experience too, and that can be as it can be a bit of a challenge with any headless implementation where you have the back end maybe not as cognizant of the front end. So we had to wrestle with those quite a bit and land something that was highly performant, scalable, flexible, and added net new functionality that was starting to emerge at the same time where the standard itself was just emerging. Because even in those days, it wasn't even fully supported by iOS and things like that. And so it was bleeding edge. It is. No, it actually, no. Well, yeah, it's a longer conversation. Yes, but EU was a little bit trickier on there. So, yeah.
Yeah. And about the time that you left Adobe, were they already working on the next iteration, App Builder and Edge Delivery? I think that probably already was set in motion, right?
As far as I know, to be honest, I wasn't deeply involved in that. We were still on a storefront journey. One of the things that we did that was probably not as widely known or publicized in the Magento world is that we we erred on the side of reusability and reusable components and services with other teams across Adobe. And, over time, the names of those products and platforms and such kind of change. But there are quite a few examples that are out there that kind of use the parts from Venya and the aspects of Venya. Top of mind, I think, TiVo.com was always a good example. Sazerac, which has like Buffalo Trace whiskey, they use a lot of those components. And, I've seen a couple of them since leaving as well, as far as like the implementations. And there was an inherent reuse there. But I think what they've done recently is with, Elena and others, have started to kind of package this around a little bit more, not quite infrastructure, but really have focused on that deployment and developer experience a bit more in a way that is kind of uniquely Adobe. But I haven't been the pieces were starting to emerge, but at that point I had not seen that emerge or even forming to what it is now. But I'm sure a lot of it's very much based on where we started.
Yeah, I think by now PWA Studio has more become somewhat of a stepping stone to the next thing that they've built. Yep. And if my information or my understanding is sound, then the PWA Studio components, or I should say Paragon components probably, those have now been more or less transformed into components that are used in Edge Delivery, so or an Experience Manager. So they still live on. I think PWA Studio doesn't really get new functionalities of further development. I think they're maintaining it the same as they are doing with Luma. But yeah, you can also see that the adoption kind of bottom out. I think there are a little over 1,000 stores live now on Build-With, which isn't perfect data, but it's always it's one measurement at least to compare platforms. And I think just to quickly paint the landscape that we're currently looking at, Adobe has released Edge Delivery Services, which is more or less a proxy to show Experience Manager pages. And then commerce is woven into that. And I think they're currently at a state where there's a bit of fallback mechanism, like cart and checkout is not really Edge Delivery yet. That falls back to Venia or even Luma. But I'm sure the dream is that, or the future plan is to evolve into a fully SaaS-like application. I think the good thing for Magento as a community is that all these services today still depend on a monolith to feed data. So Magento is still the driving factor or the backbone of everything that they're doing, but they're syncing a lot into in-memory services, so to say, so that the GraphQL, the middleware can serve product data very quickly, while the actual data structure today still comes from Magento. And I think for the upcoming years, there's such a big dependency for Adobe to Magento as a monolithic application. So many merchants currently running on that tech stack that we as a community can rest assured that it will be maintained for quite a while, and security updates are being added. But other than that, it's no secret that no new features will be introduced to Magento as a platform, and most of the things that they're now introducing into Adobe Commerce are introduced as microservices or mini applets that they even backport into Luma, which is a bit cringed when they launch Sensei Live Search, and they use React components that they load into Luma, which is already burdened with so much JavaScript, to add in React entirely for quick search. But I've personally spoken to their product team maybe over a year ago, and we discussed things like this, and it was on the roadmap to improve performance there, and still work on that. But the tendency, I think, will be that more and more things will be built independent of Magento as a monolith, and eventually it will be decoupled in a way that Magento is an optional backbone and no longer a requirement. For sure, interesting development, of course, for us as an ecosystem. I think our tone of voice has kind of shifted from being upset that Adobe took this turn, while we always knew that they were going to do this. It was no secret that they were going to move it up market. But the tone has shifted to at least realizing that the investment that Adobe today makes in the Magento platform is substantial. Just maintaining it. I mean, you have some insights in what an investment it actually is to run GitHub as an organization, do issue grooming and just processing PRs and releasing security updates, keep things compatible with newer versions of PHP, which is only ramping up. I think PHP got a bit in a slump a couple of years ago, and then with the introduction of PHP 7 and then 8, things are moving quite quickly. I mean, PHP is becoming a way more performant and more interesting language to work with. No longer the platform or the programming language that people tease you with, like for the big bullies, that it's not a proper language. It's actually really enjoyable to work with. But yeah, the release tendency of PHP makes for Adobe to have to release more updates and keep it compatible, and just things like Elasticsearch being replaced with OpenSearch, which then needs a new adapter, and things constantly move. So I think as a community, it's great that at least we have an entity like Adobe behind it to ensure reliability and have a strong brand behind it. But it's clear that on the innovation side, we need a community to drive this forward. Then the Magento Association comes into play, which has been given the role by Adobe to kind of become the shepherd, or at least to rally the community behind them to get people to become maintainer, help issue grooming, reviewing PRs, and help the Adobe team to get new bug fixes into Magento. And that's still proven to be a bit challenging. Matthias, who's now the director of the Magento Association.
I think so, yeah.
He is looking for the right. Is director right? But that's the right term. Yeah. He's really making an effort of trying to get that collaboration between the Adobe maintaining team and the Magento community going, so that Adobe has reached out a hand and said, well, if you bring the maintainers, we provide you the infrastructure. We will make sure that we accept new PRs way more quickly. There's a prioritization model right now where we can vote on PRs on GitHub, and the ones that get the most votes are being merged into Magento every month. So that's a great development. So there's actually a lot of power in the community that we've been given from Adobe. It's just they need us to help them a little bit in doing the reviewing and processing. So if you're listening and you think that's interesting, we should take the offer from Adobe and work with them. It's actually, a lot of people are really positive about this involvement, and the fact that you can now submit a PR, and in some cases they are merged within a month. that's been the number one complaint in the past. And of course, there's a lot of PR still hanging from years ago that it's still if they're still relevant, we need to bring them back to attention, like update the PRs and everything. But we need to come back and revisit the idea of working with Adobe here. How do you see the role of the MA? Of course, you were the Adobe liaison on the association board, which is where we spent 2 hours a month. You've seen another side of me where I was desperate to get things done and like change the dynamics around, or the messaging on Magento.com, that we needed that website back. And it was and still is, I think, a great vehicle for the community, the MA, where a lot of stuff is happening behind closed doors, which sounds a bit more secretive than it should be, but that's mostly because we receive a lot of input from community members that have concerns about something, or they're flagging something with us, and that's typically what we bring to a board meeting, and then that's brought to the attention of the right people in Adobe. So that liaison at Adobe, which you were before and what Ritesh is doing now, that's a really important role. But just today, I noticed that that's a good example. Shopify has started to run Google AdWords campaigns for Magento Enterprise. And I saw that and I thought, wait a minute, I thought that Adobe was quite vigilant on the usage of the Magento brand in AdWords, and normally I think Google should flag that, and that's one thing that then goes into into our MA board chat and is picked up immediately. But it's also things that are a bit more important for the community, like the ownership of the Magento brand, the fact that we needed this Magento.com website, which you and I spent many hours talking about, which got a lot of pushback initially, but now finally we're going to launch a MagentoOpenSource.org website, which should inform merchants about what the Magento platform is and serve a bit as a marketing platform. Those things, it's tricky because sometimes you need the right timing to say things publicly. It's sometimes it's a bit also time sensitive, because we want to fix something before the community panics and says, I have another example. This is a good thing, and I'll let you talk soon again.
Oh, you're fine. No, I'm enjoying this. This is like a trip down memory lane. I know exactly where and what, and all the makings of the conversation. So yeah, this is great.
Another example of something that we resolved within DMA is that I got flagged by a couple of people that on GitHub.com, on the Magento GitHub repositories, a new module was introduced, and all of the copyright contained proprietary copyright notices from Adobe. So all rights reserved, and it didn't have an open source copyright notice. And luckily, a couple of years ago, first thing they would have done is post it on Twitter and cause concerns, because this is the moment they're gonna make it. They're gonna take away the open source copyright, and this is the first sign. And so we raised this at the board. I immediately sent a message to Ritesh, and he brought it to people inside at Adobe. And we quickly got note back that no one was aware, nothing was going to change. Don't panic. Said no, I'm trying to prevent people from panicking. And it was in a beta release, and the release, I think it was for 2.4.7, so the latest release. It was already planned within a week, I think, and it was going to be launched with the new copyright notice. And they fixed it just in time before it was published, so that no one had to pick up their pitchfork and cause outrage, because there was nothing was wrong. But you know, this is a bit the tendency that the communities had in the past. So yeah, that's another thing where the MA is more or less the bridge between community and Adobe. And the reality is that the people that are currently at Adobe that work with the commerce product today, not many of them have a background with Magento. Very few of them know what this great community is about, where a response typically comes from, which is always passion. We're so passionate about our platform, and we're always a bit afraid that things will be taken away from us. And there's a lot of people at the Adobe side actually working really hard for us to maintain the platform and reach out a helping hand to move this platform forward and help us nurture the community. And when all we do is cause outrage when something seems to be going wrong, all these Adobe people see from us is our bad side. And they're actually trying to make a case internally to get things done for us. And the actual effect of us being upset means that they don't really like work, because they get anxious that if they interact with us, they might get a lot of negativity thrown at them. And I know for a fact that in the Magento days, multiple employees felt harassed personally because the community was just lashing out because there were issues with the Magento 2 product, and things were going wrong and the situation was dire. And the few people that were brave enough to stand at at the battle line, fighting for us basically, they felt terrible. And they deserved a lot better. So yeah, that's unfortunately, I think I've played a role in that to some extent as well. I know I've talked to at least one ex-Adobe person who told me personally that some things, well, I went through a major burnout. I was upset. I lost my agency. I lost my mental health, my health, all my savings. I was not necessarily angry, but I didn't understand how this could happen, and I was just upfront about how tricky that situation was for me, and people fighting hard to resolve that situation, and it has been resolved. I mean, Adobe really invested in those years after the 2.1 release. 2.2, 2.3 were really solid releases. And a lot of people worked really hard to make that happen. And today we have a platform that's working like, I don't want to, I just want to work with this. It's all that I need today. And the truth is that Adobe gave that to us. They took something that was kind of shitty. 2.0 wasn't great. There were many issues, and they turned it around, and they invested a lot to get it where it is today. And I just want to honor it. I want to make sure that we help this community and all the merchants and all the agencies, all the developers, all the platforms, including ShipperHQ, including all the payment providers and the extension developers. We have to be there for them to give continuation of this platform. Many people depend on this software for their daily work and lives. They're feeding their families. So that's really why I'm here.
It is. Well, this is almost a great pre-talk to my keynote, right? And so like these are the stories of Magento, right? And the stories are personal, they're deep. I've never worked for a company where I've seen people get tattoos of that
Yeah.
company. There's there's quite a few. And it's like, wow, that's something. That's something. There's so much more than just a platform, and there's so much more than what's there, and that's okay, right? And so I think
Hmm.
the way I think the stories you've described, I've been and empathized, and I've been on both sides of that, and I have a lot of, I think I lead with a lot of empathy for both sides, right? And I think you can see it, right? And I agree. I think Adobe's done some great work to really work on the most important parts about the quality, reliability, the stability, the security, all those things that are incredibly important, especially for a company that is as big as they are. And there's the
Hmm.
responsibilities and the stakes are higher. Security is getting harder, infrastructure is getting hard, all these things. But sometimes it means not necessarily having that the shiny new thing at every aspect, and every corner there. And for me, it's a big opportunity. I think that's so great. There's the line, and you look at kind of both of our worlds. You look at the community. Now we know where that is. Now we can innovate. That's exciting, and
Yeah.
I enjoy that part.
You mentioned your keynote. For context, Meet Magento UK will be held in 18 days. You're going to be keynote speaker.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit, what are you excited about for Meet Magento UK? And why do people need to come to the event? And what will you bring in your keynote? And you don't need to give
Yeah.
away the whole thing, but what are you going to bring us?
Yeah, I think this time it's going to be personal. I'm walking in the footsteps of people who've done this before, people who are far closer to the Magento ecosystem, far closer to, maybe the region, or far closer to what have you. But I think for me, it represents a return. It represents a perspective that I think is going to be holistic, and I think really connect with each and every person in the audience, whether you're a merchant, whether you're a partner or developer, and really cover a lot of what we're talking about. I know we're at an interesting time in the community, and so I think our stories, both the past but also our future, are the product, right? And so it kind of comes back to the conversation we talk about with, what does it mean to be a product manager, and it shift from here to there, and like this is what we're building, and things change and foundations change, and that's okay. And I'm really excited about the stories that we'll create together, but how we got here is important too. Let's not forget about that. I've talked to Philip on several occasions where he's like, we
Hmm.
should document all these stories somewhere. And while they may not be, they may be, as endearing to one person, it's endearing to this community. The stories that you talk about. There's a whole chapter on what it took to open source Page Builder, that there's not enough time to talk about. There's a whole story about last minute, last ditch efforts to hold a major Magento release because somebody took a stand against CSS variable names that were racist in nature, that were caught well
Ah.
well beyond that, and you can see that, and there's interesting, and people, and they all did that because it was right. At the time, they all did it because they cared about it, and they all did, and that's what fuels this. And so I've always, from my perspective, appreciated your continued story, the highs, the lows, and everything you've been doing as the essentially the guardian of the Magento galaxy. And I'm just hoping to help more. And so my talk is really to help, I think, inspire, not dwell in the past, recognize the past though, recognize the changes here, and I think point out the areas where we can help. There's a lot more here that I think people realize has always been there before. That we just don't have to wait for someone to set that in motion. We don't have to wait for someone to set up, a
Yeah.
contribution day or a mage run or this or that. It's all kind of there. Just needs a champion here or there, and maybe it's new people here and there. That's okay, for that one. So that's going to be the premise of my talk, but I think it's going to appeal to everybody: people who've been with the community for a long time, people who are new to it, and people who have some of the big questions, which I think are super fair. Change is tough, but I could be more excited about the future. I think that Magento's role in the way you described it plays a very, very big part in that, and gives us a lot of room to innovate at those edges, no matter who you are, whether you're a partner, whether you're a developer. It's just a matter of taking advantage of it, but it's right there.
So when you look at Magento as a platform and the ecosystem, what are your and maybe take MageOS in account, which
Yeah.
we haven't talked about yet. What is your outlook? Like if you had to make a guess and maybe weave in a bit of advice or like how you think what should we do as a community? Where are things heading?
I think we should work tightly aligned but loosely coupled. And what I mean by that is we should align on the things that are most important for this community, the people, the goals, the mission, not debate over the things that like we're waiting for such and such, this company, this entity, this whoever, this person of the past, or what have you. I think you have to align on what's important, and really that hasn't changed for years and years and years and years. But stay loosely coupled. We've got a couple. We've got emergent communities that are existent in the Magento ecosystem. I love what's happening in MageOS. I'd love to see more of that connect into the greater good. I was really encouraged with Matthias had shared at Meet Magento Florida and the roadmap. That's great. I think with what Perul is doing on the with the communities, shout out Peru. She's awesome. She does a lot of things behind the scenes between her and Nicole that I don't think people see, and so they're doing some great things as well.
I sometimes wish that it was more visible. And
Yeah,
it's not for every person to be a public person, but
yeah,
Perul's working so hard. She's
she
so
is.
kind and she's amazing to talk with, and she has her heart in the right place for
Yep,
Magento. Um, I just wish at times that the communication channels were just a bit better, not just for her, but we kind of lost the public faces in Adobe,
yep,
which maybe is caused by what I mentioned before. We haven't treated them well enough. So b- stepping up and being there as a public figure puts a target on your back,
yep,
which is just really sad because we flourished under the time where we had people that we could communicate to and people that had enough reach because the effect is that everything that Perul does gets far too little attention and visibility.
mhm,
And the best thing that I can do is retweet it or reshare it
mhm,
with a comment, but it would ideally get a better platform where and I know a lot of things are shared in the Magento forums, and that's just not the favorite place on the internet of most people.
yep,
It's just not a great communication channel. But nevertheless, I've met her on a couple of events. Last time in Magento India, and I really appreciate her. She's
mhm.
great, and I hope she keeps doing the good work for us.
For
Yeah,
sure.
it's
Shout out to her.
yeah. You said you would like to see MageOS more integrated into the greater good, and I think that's something that's already established, I guess. Um, Way more collaboration is already taking place between the MA and MageOS in content
Hmm.
creation, and there's a bit of tasks that are being devised or shared,
Hmm.
split between the two. And yeah, there's just a lot more official work that comes with anything that the MA does. And
Yeah.
I think for the MA, it's really important that they make sure that the official Magento repositories that they remain maintained and that they get enough attention just for being the backbone, be the leading. We worked on Magento LTS STS, you and me
Hmm.
together.
Yep.
It was a big plan that we worked out at the MA board. We spent months discussing it, and
Hmm.
eventually it took another turn, which was sad. But now what eventually came from that is that MageOS more or less became the promise of having a STS version,
Hmm.
and Magento itself is that long-term support version. And what we're trying to accomplish with MageOS is that we can really bring innovation to the platform without restrictions, but also not messing with the LTS version. You know, the STS is just the STS. It's a distribution, and we can, if you want, we can set up an extra distribution where we can call it an experimentation lab. And we just mess around with things, and we refactor things, we build new indexer system, we build a new feature on top of it. And if something works out well, we can decide to move that into MageOS and even push it upstream to Magento open source and see, at some point, we need to test what Adobe is open to and receiving from the community. And if we build a features, one thing that's been worked on at MageOS, which Matthias also brought up as an idea in the MA, so there's a bit of double work that's been done there. But the actual building of a new admin panel or redesign of the Magento admin has taken place in MageOS. A couple of folks took it upon them to just write new style sheets basically, and
I saw it. It's beautiful. I saw Ardom's done a nice job of that.
It makes such a difference, because if you're an agency and you're selling an e-commerce platform to a merchant, and often they don't really care about the platform, they care about the solution, and they care about what they see. And if as an agency you can show them a couple of projects that you've done and those shops look nice and they're performant and they do what they need to do, and then they see the admin panel and it looks horrifically outdated, it's just not as easy to sell if a platform like Shopify or even Shopware has a just updated UI in the admin, and it's not even really UX, it really boils down to design, whether something looks outdated or not. You don't even need to update the tech stack in the admin, not for the merchant. For developers, sure, they would like to get rid of Knockout and Require.js and everything. But just to make it easier to sell it to a merchant, it just needs to look nicer. And that's something that we've worked on. And one of the ideas that we had at the MA board was, well, let's see if we can work on that as a community. And not bother Adobe with asking permission or like getting them involved too much. And then let's see what happens if we offer it to them. And if they want, they can take it and it's free. And they can push it upstream to work with Adobe Commerce as well. So even their paying customers get a nice... I mean, Adobe Commerce already has an updated theme, which looks better than the Luma or the standard Magento version. But still, it's a bit outdated. But I know it's enterprise software. I know what Salesforce looks like. We're all paying good money for software like that, and it looks horrific. But sometimes it just needs to do the job right.
100%. I've really been inspired by the innovation. I'm hoping for the best for that, and I think if you're outlook wise, I think the more that we build together, I think the better. And so and there's different pockets that are doing great work. Huva doing great work, MageOS doing great work, and the partners are doing great work, and we're all filling in gaps in areas that ultimately where the customers and the merchants win, right? And so I think that's the fun part. When we start building together, everything starts to kind of click. And the same thing I would say about the community as we did in the earliest days of PWA, like, let's make this so big people can't ignore it. Like you start you can start very, very small, but if you make it so big, you get your first customer, first contributors, you start to solve problems of like, hey, I can't ignore this. They may not even be talking to you or whatever, but they're noticing, right? But if you make it so big, it's impossible to ignore. And so I wish that for the community, and I think that it's a different orientation around the innovation engine itself, backed by some of the principles and the ways of kind of getting change done and the PRs and such, but like, I'm excited about it. It's actually, there's a lot we can do with this. And I think it's part of the talk. I think we shouldn't feel as held back. I think it's sometimes there'll be some occasional folks who feel that way. And I get it. It's a different orientation. There's a lot you can do though. There really is. We're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, we need to work as a community. And what we really needed was to bring back the positive vibe, which was really at the core of what I've tried to do with Hyvä. Like there's a zero tolerance for negativity on our Slack.
Yep.
I immediately act when I see someone is talking negatively about someone else's work, whether that's negative feedback about what someone else built or whether they are talking bad about a particular extension developer. It's always, we try to really keep the human aspect inside. So I always immediately DM people and I say, okay, I understand you might be frustrated because you're working with an extension that doesn't do what you would like it to do. Not everyone who's building software is a senior developer. And if you try to remember the time that you were a junior developer, you might realize that the person that built that extension that didn't get the proper guidance for whatever reason, or they're still learning, or they didn't get the time or the resources to do it well, you just took away their opportunity to do better because you didn't provide them feedback, and you just made them feel really, really, really bad about themselves. And that's just not how we build a community where everyone joins forces and we have a happy vibe. And the only way that we can work as a community is to be positive and help each other. And if someone who built an extension that didn't work as expected or didn't follow best code practices, if even that person can still feel good about themselves because they got some help and some feedback that they could implement to build a better product, or, escalate it to a colleague and say, well, we got this feedback and how to resolve this, and maybe it needs to be escalated. But if we start putting down particular extension companies or particular developers, there's nothing to be wonder. You get rid of your frustration maybe because you were stuck with a particular extension and you couldn't make it work. But it's not how you build a community. So we need more of that.
Positive vibes only. Positive vibes only. Maybe we should change that. Change my talk to that. That's it. The story is just positive vibes. That's it.
Yeah, and that's all its own perception, and it's not just that. It's also the way that we are talking about Magento as a community or as an ecosystem, like the wider e-commerce ecosystem. There's too much talk of Magento is still alive, or Magento's not dead yet,
Right.
and it's the opposite of what you want to achieve. Because and it's good. People are not aware of what they're implying. But what you're implying is that you're countering that someone else has said or claimed that Magento is dying or is going to die. And that's included when you say Magento is still alive, you're countering. And we shouldn't We are here, we have an amazing ecosystem, we have a market share still in e-commerce that is enormous and has so much potential and has so much that we can do. We need to talk about what's next, how we can grow, and just outline the positive things. I've talked about this with Matthias because we go to events together and then we spend hours at the airport and we talk about how we should approach things at the next event. And so I've already discussed with him, and of course he fully agrees. So it's really in the way that we send out that message that makes a lot of difference. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things we see in commerce, and I would look beyond even the Magento platform, was influenced by the Magento platform, right? And so it's hard not to recognize that. You think about people who've moved on, think about the innovations, the perspectives, and sometimes people like myself coming back into that and go, now we have new perspectives to bring into this to help fuel the innovation, to help do everything described. And so, yeah, I love the message there, right? Because in the end, we're just people, we're just humans. We're trying, it's, yes, there's all the principles about delivering quality software. Nobody's saying let's not, but it's how you get there. It's the people who show up. It's the people who care. It's the people helping each other to achieve that goal, right? And so that's the like the spirit of being like tightly aligned and loosely coupled. Let's all get there. We all need to do, and things have changed. That's fine. But yeah, I love your perspective on the is Magento still alive? Sure, it's alive. Fine, all right. Like I acknowledge it's alive. But that conversation already starts. Like you're on the back foot already when you're having that conversation. Just like, and that's just not where it is.
No, and in the end, for so many agencies and merchants, Magento's working so well, and they're not even aware of the bigger picture or whatever's happening on a global scale. They just have a piece of software that's working well, and agencies that are just showing an e-commerce solution that they implement, that they built our entire stack around, which is a sound solution, which is beats customizability or even performance or ROI, on other platforms. It depends on the use case. And sure, it's become more difficult to put a small merchant that's just starting out. You should always test your market. And there's cheap ways to implement Magento 2, but for sure Magento 1 was more accessible to the smallest merchants. And we've gotten into an era where it makes sense if you decide to knit some socks and you want to sell them online, you shouldn't be on Magento. But as soon as you go up from there, Magento very quickly becomes an option depending on your use case and your requirements. In the end, for the merchants, they need a working solution and they need a partner that helps them to be enabled to sell their products online. And it doesn't matter. It's so funny. It was recently, there was a post about Shopify being the market leader and eating up the entire market and how important that was. And I just fail to see how it is relevant who the biggest platform is. Because that's, if anything, it's a bad thing. Because you kill competition, you kill innovation, and you reduce the amount of choices that a merchant and an agency has to build an e-commerce store. It's as simple as that. And there's always a use case to build on the one platform versus the other. And if we stop being agnostic as an ecosystem or as the entire e-commerce global market, we all lose. And I think no one is helped by Magento going away, because the options, there's no platform that has as many extensions, as many integrations, solution providers. The developer ecosystem is still the biggest. So we have everything we need to make this successful towards the future. I mean, it's there. The only thing we need is continuation and a positive vibe. So that's where our heads need to be.
Totally agree. I could not agree more. Yeah, I'm here for it. I'm back for it. I just see endless potential. I mean, yes, we need to focus. Yes, we need to build more. And all these things, but the makings are right in front of us. So yeah, it's a good time. It's a good time to be in technology, and I feel the same way too. By the way, in terms of single versus multi-platform, there's always going to be a leader. There's always going to be change. But I'll tell you what, you see these kinds of trends happening even with cloud, right? And you're seeing this now with AI. And you've got, when you have multiple choices out there, that's competition, and that makes everybody better. And you learn from that.
Monopolies are never beneficial. And you see with a monopoly that Shopify is creating, that they are locking in or locking out payment providers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They pick one, and you can still choose another payment provider, but you will pay way more fees.
Yep.
So they're killing an industry. And they're handing everything to Stripe. As long as they want to work with Stripe, Stripe gets all the transactions until they decide to switch to another PSP. And it's so much power in the hands of one platform. And in the nature of open source, you get choice. You get to decide with Magento or Adobe Commerce, you get to decide what payment provider you want to work with. And there's a market, the market is at work to decide what rates you're paying. So you get competitive rates. And Shopify's preventing that from happening. So yeah, it's not all good.
It's not, and you know, I'm not. You know, they are doing good work. They're doing some interesting things. I like what they're doing in a few areas, but there's so many other There's so many choices out there, and the benefits of, you know, what we've done and what we're doing in Magento, like, allows you to basically choose your own investor, do exactly what you want to do, and then take back that innovation and do that and do more of that yourself. And I think that's always been the spirit, right? If you think about the principles, what we're trying to drive for, being able to own your destiny and innovate at your own pace in own ways. That's where I want to be. But it's, you know, it's an interesting time for sure.
So one last thing I wanted to ask you about. So you joined ShipperHQ.
Yep.
What are they about? So what is your role at ShipperHQ, and what's the business you're in? And why should people consider using ShipperHQ?
Oh, there you go. Jo sent you this question, didn't she? So I lead product at ShipperHQ. So I joined back in December, and so I lead product management, product design, and then product research. And so ShipperHQ, their goal is and has been to be the leading shipping experience platform on the planet. And so we are multi-platform, but in many ways, we fill in a lot of the gaps that the platforms don't necessarily do out of the box. And ultimately, the work that we're doing around shipping is not unlike taxes, where we know that if you make small improvements by, let's say, giving choice on carriers, choice and, you know, ultimate control on rules, and offering free shipping and other ways in an effective way, that will lead to higher sales. That leads to AOV and such. And I think it continues to be still a very underappreciated part of the larger ROI, because I know that, and we know that merchants and customers are always paying a big shipping bill, and then they want to understand why. They want to optimize it and make the most of it. But that's just the first step. Some of the things we're doing on the product roadmap have a lot to do with taking shipping from a cost center and making it a profit center. And the work that we're doing, I think, is really starting to, I would say, flip the script on that and really get into some interesting work around analytics and things like that. They're going to be coming out soon. So yeah, there's enormous potential, and this is on the the foundation that Jo and many have built for well over 10 years, and something that's already worked extremely well, and started off in the Magento ecosystem as a series of extensions for web shop apps, and has created itself into a platform that is much larger than any of that. It's a shipping experience platform. And so, yeah, I jumped on the opportunity as soon as I could. And to date, I'm responsible for the product, the experience, and the research as well. So
I worked with it in the past. I had when I still had an agency, I had one particular customer who shipped watch straps. But also cases, Rolex cases where you can display like 3 or 5, or they had this leather rolls where you could put the watches in and like carry them, because people that have many Rolexes need to travel with them.
Of course, of course.
Their shipping was a huge bottleneck. They previously just had 3 types of boxes, and they charged one amount on the store, and they just took an average, like, okay, so in some cases it cost us $10 to ship something, and in some cases it's 20. So let's take 15 as an average. So all customers pretty much, they had it separate, I think, a little bit into customer groups, but there was no real, there was no mathematics, no algorithm in deciding what the pricing should be. And we implemented ShipperHQ there, and which acts as so your product is a SaaS, and it connects the store to shipping providers, but there's a brain in your SaaS that takes in information from carriers and then applies a set of rules or matrices or conditions to that data, and then decides what rates should be sent to the e-commerce platform. And that was really powerful because it literally it's like a rule engine. And we could, so one thing was the dimensional shipping. So we could say a strap goes into an envelope, but 5 straps don't fit an envelope, so you need the smallest FedEx box. If there's one watch box included, then you can fit 4 straps with a box into the number 2 package from FedEx. So really that precisely, we could define at what point they needed to pick a bigger box with FedEx and actually always charge the exact amount that the package would cost to send with FedEx. And that really empowered them because they could, they're based here in the Netherlands, and they could ship packages with FedEx priority. They could ship a watch strap and have it delivered in 24 hours in New York, while their biggest competitor was in the US, and it took them 3 to 4 business days to ship or to have it delivered. So they were beating the competition across the ocean on shipping rates because they could so precisely decide what the rates were. So they had competitive rates and super quick shipping. So it really helped them reduce cost and make it way more attractive for customers to pay that shipping rate. And it was fair because otherwise, ordering a strap and having to pay $15 while it in fact only costed $5, I don't know. That just doesn't feel fair, and it makes you shop around and go for the competition, even though that takes 4 days longer to arrive. So they had a win-win solution powered by ShipperHQ. So yeah, I was really amazed because we could really, on the level of country and even to zip code, we could define what rule in what order should be applied. We had some issues in Magento where FedEx would feed us prices including and excluding VAT depending on the country, and we needed them to always be excluding VAT in Magento. So we wrote a set of rules in ShipperHQ in the platform to reduce the VAT before it was sent to Magento, so that we always receive prices ex VAT. So all in all, a lot of things that really empowered this merchant that wasn't clear for me from the outside, because it's not, when you say we're a shipping experience tool or it's very extensive, and
it really
especially
is.
I think in the US market where you have so many the cross-border rules are quite, in the Netherlands, if you ship something to the Netherlands, it's the same. It doesn't matter if they deliver it at the end of the street or the other side of the country. All the rates are the same, and you always have it delivered within a day. And it's different in the US, I know.
Well, we handle the complex. Yeah, it's funny. Even having known ShipperHQ as long as I have, coming into it, I still believe a good portion of our value is probably underappreciated. There's so much that we do, around the no code, so much we do around the complexities right in between the platforms and the carriers that we've got this expertise. And so I've been impressed. I knew exactly kind of going into it, but even more so, I would say just sky's the limit on something that really has a strong fit, solves very specific problems, and it's a good foundation to innovate as well. And so that's what we're trying to do. So
Yeah. Yeah, you take over a bit of the checkout experience with
yep.
also drop-in applet where you dynamically show rates or delivery dates and locations and everything. So yeah, that's empowering. You're bullish on AI, I think. I see a lot of tweets from Joe on stepping in on that market. In what way are you leveraging that?
Yeah, I mean we're bullish, but I think practical on AI. I think there's a lot of obvious things that we can do, certainly around shipping that other people are doing around just presenting what's out there and forecasting and really thinking about the data behind what would make a quote unquote great experience. And a great experience is gonna be different from a merchant that it will be for an end shopper or what have you. But getting a handle on that and really allowing AI to kind of connect the dots where it's not there. I think that's kind of the first step. Let's get all the data on the table. Let's start to see what's there, start to forecast that. But as you can imagine, if you're as tied to shipping as we are, being able to accurately and maybe even start to recommend some of the changes you described would be, I'd say, would be a logical next step if I'm not getting too ahead of myself. But yeah, we're solution first though on it. There's a lot of AIs everywhere, etc. That's great. It's there. It's a capability. We're attaching it to real problems solved that we're seeing from our customers, and we know exactly what those are really in the next couple releases. So pretty exciting times, and there's a lot coming. So
very cool. I think this is a perfect place to wrap up. We're over an hour, so we're asking some patience from our listeners. But I mean, it was the first episode in a long time, so I think we're allowed. I'm really looking forward. Yeah, we actually did it. Now we just need to continue it. I will see you in 18 days, which I'm really looking forward to.
It's been a long time. It's great seeing you here too. It's been that too has been a long time, so I can't wait.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing your keynote and catching up, and I'll try to get you on occasionally on MageTalk and see what's new, and I hope we can continue to get your engagement with the community, and I know you're trying to get more involved with the Magento Association as well. We have some board seats open and new elections coming up, so who knows, you'd be interested in giving it another go. We can definitely use your perspective.
I am. I've been pretty vocal about it. This is a new me. I'm a little bit more pushy, a little bit more specific. I would love to be part of the MA again. There's a lot that I know that I could do to help. I believe in the cause, the mission. So I've already been. It's not a secret for sure. I definitely want to get more involved in everything we can around the community. That's what we need right now. So
awesome. Yeah, I hope I'll get to work with you again at the MA board. Thanks for your time. Really enjoyed it. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you at the next episode of Mage.